In today's video, yet another Toronto condo review, where I will go through some of the pros, some of the cons of the Toronto condo building, some of the history, some of the sales data, my professional opinion on it, and so much more. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, back with another video for you guys here today. You can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, my office information, and my TikTok. Also, you can search my name on Google for contact information and my Google reviews as well. Furthermore, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. As always, your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. If you find this content valuable, but you're not obliged to do so, as I always like to say, and as always, people like to make fun of that in the comments, but you're not obliged. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which is yet another Toronto condo building review. For more of this series, you can check my channel. I believe I did the Esplanade, I did 1 Bloor Street, and there will be a lot more coming. But for today's episode, we're gonna go through 10 York by Tridel. Now, I put up a poll asking people a while back on my channel which condo you would like to see reviewed next, and 10 York at the time of recording of this video was the winner, beating out 105 the Queensway by a slim margin. Thus, as a result, I'm going to do 10 York. Look forward to another poll asking you guys which building you want reviewed next, coming up on my channel shortly as well. Enough of that, let's get to the review. First, we're going to start with the basic details. The building number, 10 York. Where does it reside? In downtown Toronto, C1 waterfront, major intersection, Harbor and York Street. Who is the builder? Well, Tridel is the builder, and in this video I'm going to talk about that a lot. And as many people know, if you've watched this channel, I think very highly of Tridel. The architectural firm for this project was Wallman Architects. It has a very particular triangular shape, like a blade at the base. It completed construction in 2019. Total amount of stories is 66, with about 690 to 700 units, depending on which source you take a look at. But the best source I can find on this stated 694. The property management company is Dell Property Management, which we will also get into a little bit later. And overall, what this building has included in the maintenance fees is, in terms of utilities, water, so heat and hydro are not included, but of course, building insurance and common elements usage and internet. And previously, this project began construction around 2013 upon what was previously a empty parking lot. For those who obviously have lived in Toronto long enough, around this intersection, they remember that parking lot. And it was actually quite, if I recall correctly, it was a parking lot and a car impound lot as well. So pretty much just parking and industrial at Harbor and York. And actually, when it was first initially proposed around 2011, 2012, it was proposed for 10 stories higher than what it currently is, about around 77, 78 stories. But interestingly enough, the amount of stories was limited by a factor of 10 in 2012. And furthermore, the actual initial design of the building was also altered around 2012. And initially, there were some plans to have overground parking, and that was also altered as well, wherein, of course, what is the case now, they moved the parking to underground parking. Now, an extent of how was it overall going to be all overground parking, a mixture of overground and underground, it's a little bit difficult to make clear of that, but the point here is, initially, it did have plans to be 10 stories higher. There was an initial first design. Furthermore, there was going to be a certain overground parking aspect to it as well, all of which were changed in 2012. Now let's take a deeper look in terms of the area, right? The immediate area, a little bit further now. Here we see our model as we have it. This is waterfront. This is the Gardner Expressway, obviously the CN Tower, Rogers Center, so on and so forth. And here we see 10 York as indicated obviously by this icon here. And off the bat, right, before we go into the area, for those who are not familiar, the triangular shape at the base, which kind of presides all the way up to the top, is quite clear. Now, one thing about the area, in terms of convenience and being close to the water, is absolutely fantastic. But this is something we will touch on a bit more in terms of, my opinions on the building. In a way, being so close to the Gardner and the off-ramp and on-ramp, in my frank opinion, it is a bit awkwardly situated. Once again, it feels as if it's just a layover for a highway off-ramp, right? Nonetheless, that is the cards that the builders Tridel were dealt. And the triangular shape, once again, is not so much an aesthetic decision they made for the sake of aesthetics, but frankly speaking, given the triangular shape of the lot and its proximity to the Gardner Expressway, I think it was a little bit more enforced by the situation than more so creative freedom. Furthermore, one other thing we will touch on is that, of course, since it's so close to the Gardner Expressway, far closer than even the notorious ICE condos, which that's another thing we'll talk about, units on the lower floors, even by Tridel standards, will struggle with some noise insulation, surely. And I've seen that firsthand when I've shown units in this building. And to the north of the building, if we were to zoom out a bit, you do have obstructed views. So you won't necessarily, unless you're on the higher floors, right, you won't have the best views. What you will have is obstructed views. So necessarily speaking, northern faced units aren't the best option on the lower floors for Gardner Expressway reasons, to the mid floors for view purposes, for exposure purposes. At the end of the day, how much this will impact property values, that's another story entirely. Not to say it won't have any impact, but of course, given the general nature of the Toronto real estate market, it will frankly appreciate. Now, if we were to apply more of the top-down view, not the 3D view, what we see here, the sheer proximity to Scotiabank Arena, Rogers Centre, the CN Tower, waterfront, of course. Furthermore, in terms of the eastern view, right, what it's surrounded from the eastern front, is these harbor buildings right here. And although these Harbor Square buildings are not as notoriously poor as the ICE condo buildings, apologies to my fans who own units in ICE condo buildings, but I have to call it as it is. Although that's not the case, these buildings are also a little problematic in their own way, and in terms of pure exposure, these will also in a way be in the way as well. Your safest exposures are probably western exposure, and of course here we have the southern exposure. Now obviously the most ideal in most circumstances, 99 out of 100 circumstances, is the southern exposure. In this particular case, more so because of the unobstructed nature and the water views. But a less scenic but nonetheless safe exposure would be western as well. So overall, the area in terms of convenience and in terms of proximity to shops, waterfront, amenities, is absolutely fantastic. It's so nestled close to the Gardner Expressway, the off-ramp and the on-ramp, that the most intimate immediate area doesn't feel as friendly for end user purposes or even tenant purposes. So most factors considered in terms of area, in terms of where it's located, it's pretty good. But I can name areas that are as convenient, close to as centrally located, but better for walking and end user purposes. Now, once again, a couple of steps down the street, you're in the heart of downtown. It's not necessarily the worst for walking purposes. It's just where it is so close to the Gardner Expressway is a little worrisome. Now, before we get into the pros and cons of this building, some stuff I've already touched on a bit, let's go through some of the more data-oriented information in terms of sales data. In terms of sales history, the earliest sales occurring for this building were public sales, right? There's some cases where we won't have access to private sales, owner to owner sales. So insofar as public sales are concerned, the earliest sales were of course occurring at the assignment stage of things. The earliest of which I could find was March 21st of 2013, where for instance, unit 6104 sold on March 21st, 2013, a 1-bed, 1-wash for $488,000. Typically with assignments, they stay on the market for a long time because the buyer of the assignment has to put down a lot of equity and cash. They have to match and exceed the deposit of what the current seller has put down. As a result, they're hard fits. They're a little bit more sophisticated than your typical residential transactions. But what we see is a lot of assignments in the early stages, far and few between. And this was the case into 2014, wherein, for instance, there was another unit that sold, I believe unit number 6710, that sold for $2.8 million, a 3-bed and 2-wash in 2014. And of course, this continued up until 2019, which was the first full year of sales data that we have at our disposal here. And when we look at 2019, we have to look at the median. Right now, we're going to look at the median and averages, but for the first couple of years, median, because the reason for that is the averages, if we look at, for instance, 2019 versus 2020, since it was a limited amount of transactions, so a small sample size, and you do have a wide array of price point transactions. So you might have a $2 million transaction and a $600,000 transaction. The averages can be thrown off with a small sample size. So the median here is a better measure. And in terms of 2019, median was $764,000 sold price. Into 2020, when we look at the median sold price, we were looking at $785,000 median sold price. Now, this is obviously across all condominium types. Once again, that's what we're even looking at median in the first place. Ideally, we would have to look at how ones performed year over year, 1+1s, 2s. But frankly speaking, that would be such a long video. Information I am always happy to share, by the way, but it can't be that long a video, right? Now, going into 2021, the median actually dropped, right? And this is calendar year. The median actually dropped into 2021, where we went from $785,000 median sold price to $777,000. And what is interesting is when we look at the PSF and the median, as I implicated, the median here dropped into 2021, the PSF dropped into 2021. So by those metrics, it seems like there was a drop in property values in 10 York into 2021. But when we look at the average, we see an increase of about $120,000 because from 2021, the average now we're looking at the average was $896 going to 2021 at $1,020,000. So when the PSF is down, the average is up, but the median is also down. What that shows me was there is a lot more transactions, a lot more inventory in this building, double of the previous year potentially that came onto the market. And that's actually what happened. I looked at the number of transactions. The transactions not quite, but nearly doubled. And furthermore, as an antecedent to that, listings increased substantially. So there was far more inventory available in 2021. So it's quite safe to say actually that, once again, this is general purposes. The best ideal comparison is looking at ones over a year or 1+1s, but overall, all condo types accounted for, all exposures accounted for, right? Prices in this building for, once again, all types kind of stagnated into 2021. Now, 2021 was a particularly peculiar year in the Toronto condo market because the first month was a down month, but an improving month. February improved a little bit further, but it got quite hot into the spring market. Not buyer friendly by any means, let's not get that confused, but more relaxed. And then things obviously exploded into the end of 2021. But it's safe to say, nonetheless, when the PSF is down, the average is down, the median is up, it was somewhat of a stagnation in 10 York for 2021. Now into 2022, the numbers speak for themselves. There's no if and or buts about this. Everything is up only based on 4 transactions, limited amount of transactions, but both in terms of average and median, prices are up. Where in terms of average, we're looking at an average sold price based on 4, once again, limited transactions, but an average sold price of 1.156 and a median sold price of $960,000. Quickly, the PSF, in terms of PSF, we went from 1170 PSF in 2021 to, depending on which sources you look at, 1270 to 1280 PSF into 2022. Once again, across all condo types, blah, 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 blah. But I just want to make sure these are general numbers, right? For the best particular analysis, you have to look at unit type by unit type, exposure by exposure. Now let's break down this building in terms of the pros and cons and some miscellaneous notes in terms of what you should know about this building, right? Because I don't just go based on the numbers, I also go based upon my experience with this building. Okay, so in terms of pros, of course, Tridel. Tridel is by far the best builder, far and ahead of other builders that works in the GTA for Toronto and York region and Vaughan condominiums. The quality builds. There's a reason there's such a high premium for their pre-sales. They don't cut corners. Of course, at some point, most builders, every single builder cuts some corners, but to put it differently, they cut the least amount of corners than anyone. That's even in comparison to all the other good builders. I've said this a million times. I'll say it again. They are the Apple of Toronto builders. And their slogan, built to last or built for life, whichever version, is true. It's frankly very true. So when you buy into a Tridel building, you are without a shadow of a doubt in good hands. Pro number 2, the location. Furthermore, in terms of what I really like about this building is the location, right? As I said, we went through the location in depth earlier. Convenient, close to the waterfront, close to obviously transit, close to Scotiabank Arena, Rogers Center, the CN Tower, the heart of downtown, a couple of steps away from King and Queen, very centrally located. And in terms of location, I would give it a grade of 9 out of 10. The reason now it's not 10 out of 10, getting into one of the cons, which I also touched on, is just it's so close to the garden. It's just very close to the garden. And although this is a very pedantic, I guess, or overly critical critique, nonetheless, I have to be fair. I just don't like where it is situated with regards to the garden. It really does feel like a highway off-ramp, right? And furthermore, touching on some of the cons, this is where, once again, elaborate upon something I discussed earlier. It's proximity to the ICE condos, right? 12 and 14 York, which not only is the proximity to those condos an issue, although I think I can make a separate video about those condos that is a little bit more optimistic than a lot of people would think. Nonetheless, they're not good condominiums. They have rampant issues with Airbnbs, fights, just overall a lot of headaches. So not only is it an issue because it's so close to those buildings, but it often gets confused for those buildings, believe it or not, because those are 12 and 14 York. A lot of people hear ICE condos, York Street, 12 York, 10 York, same thing in their mind. On 6Buzz or Blog TO or on Twitter, they just kind of mesh 10 York with 12 and 14 York in their mind. And even if you explain to them it's a different building, different builder, different property management company, it still is as if it's a condominium that's close to the nuclear plant, or it's a condominium that's close to a graveyard, right? It can be an amazing building, but it kind of has a negative connotation via association. But once again, this is a very minuscule complaint I have against this building. Because moving on to another pro, it's a very in-demand building. It's quite in demand. I get asked about 10 York all the time. A lot of buyers are interested in 10 York, investors and end users alike. And I always see constant demand for this building. And what sets it apart from the neighboring buildings, which, as I said, I will also touch on 88 and 100 Harbor. Those are not nearly as problematic as the ICE condos, but frankly speaking, they also have their set of issues as well. Not in terms of rampant Airbnbs, but it attracts a much younger crowd, and the property management I'm not the biggest fan of. The logistics of how they receive and, you know, take Amazon packages, Uber Eats orders. I know those are very small particular things, but those are things you're gonna notice when you live inside a condo building. I don't like 88 and 100 Harbor in terms of that. But once again, although it's close to 88 and 100 Harbor, the ICE condos, it has no Airbnbs. Airbnbs are outlawed in this building. Now, do Airbnbs operate illegally? I actually found one instance where there was an Airbnb operating illegally in this building. That's the key point here. It was operating illegally, right? By the condominium's own bylaws, there are no Airbnbs allowed. But moving on to the opposite side of the spectrum now in terms of what could be potentially a con is, although there's no Airbnbs, is a high portion of people in this building are renters. Very difficult to say exactly, to put a precise number of it on it, but by some measures I took a look at, you can say anywhere from 50% to, by other measures, 60% of people who live in this building are renters. So there's a high amount of rentals in this building, not a lot of end users. It's not filled with end users. Nonetheless, is that necessarily the worst thing? No, it's not the worst thing, right? If the tenants are properly vetted and it's proper tenants, it's gonna feel like another end user living next to you. But at the same time, it's of course for end users less than ideal. Ideally, you would appreciate something around 60-40 split. And as I said, from the back end of that, I've worked with a lot of investors who are interested in this building. So, you know, if there's a lot of demand, as I said previously, from investors in this building, it's safe to say there's going to be a lot of renters, because people who invest, you know, obviously, most likely 9 times out of 10 are going to rent out their units. Leading me to the biggest con, actually, because all the other cons I've stated, all the other negatives are minute in nature. They're just things you would rather avoid, but they won't break your back. This is actually the biggest problem I have with this building, which is, for such a great builder, for such a great location, for such a great aesthetic, for such a professional finish, it actually has quite mediocre layouts. The layouts in these buildings are quite shoebox. Not an actual shape shoebox, but you get what I'm saying. It's quite cookie cutter, very mediocre. I actually think 300 Front, believe it or not, another Tridel building, has better layouts. Now 300 Front has its own problems in terms of Airbnbs being an issue in 300 Front, not to the extent of other buildings, of course, but issue nonetheless. But the layouts in 300 Front are much better. Here, the layouts are so mediocre and average and cookie cutter. It's not bad, by the way. Now, please do not get this confused with me saying these are bad layouts necessarily, because I could show you a lot of buildings with not mediocre layouts, but horrific layouts, just absolutely atrocious layouts. But I guess for Tridel standards, I was a little let down by the layouts overall in these buildings. Once again, mediocre to average, nothing bad, but you won't find fantastic layouts in this building, unless you're looking at the penthouses or the 2+1s. Some other minor key things you should keep in mind: it gets quite hot in the summers in this building. And this building actually has quite high utility costs for hydro and heat. Because as I said, hydro and heat are not covered in the maintenance. Water isn't covered in the maintenance. And what I've noticed in terms of feedback from people who have worked within these buildings, tenants and sellers and buyers alike, is that in terms of resident feedback, the utility bills in this building tend to be a little bit higher in terms of how much you're paying than other buildings. Which leads me to my final grade. Accounting for everything, right? And I'm gonna obviously give a general grade, right? When I work with particular buyers and sellers, when I sit down and see their particular criteria, there's buildings that are really good generally, but won't be good for them. There are certain buildings that are kind of subpar, but actually for their particular case, it would be great for them. But overall, generally speaking, I would have to give this building 10 York. If I were to give it a grade, maybe out of 10, I would give it like a 8.75 to 9 out of 10. Now that's actually gonna surprise a lot of people, because I've said for the longest time, I think this building is a little bit overrated. But when I say it's overrated, because I work with a lot of people who rank this building as like a 10 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10. And that's the popular consensus amongst a lot of real estate agents. In my frank opinion, it's a really good building. There aren't many options in downtown that are better than it. However, I would probably have to say some of the complaints I have with regards to proximity to Gardner, the layouts mainly kind of get in the way of me giving it a perfect 10 out of 10 or a 9.5. But at the end of the day, once again, this is a general rating. When I sit down with buyers and sellers, see their particular criteria, that's a different story entirely. Anyways, that's Sam from Saberi6 Real Estate, Remax Realtron Realty Inc. Let me know if you have any further questions about 10 York or any other videos. Feel free to get in touch with me with my contact info in the description. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe and stay tuned. Thank you.